you got to make the best of your situation, right?
If Master Splinter, which was walking the streets of New York City, he'd get beaten to death with a large bat. I'm pretty
Oh, if you
sure.
saw a rat that big, man, that'd be like, yeah, he'd be like public enemy number one.
For sure. For sure.
Even like Diddy would beat him up.
I hope he doesn't get out soon.
He is. I think he only got like 2 years.
That's. I feel like there are too many people locked up for like tax evasion or like I don't know, way smaller things that are getting more
Right.
time than. But that's not the topic of our show. The topic of our show is basketball. And not just basketball, Denver Nuggets basketball. This is started here. Nuggets Wave. This is Ray. You can find me online at Rave on Hackshaw. I am joined, as always, by Peter Bucketons 88. How you doing?
Good, Ray. I was just like on pins and needles, just hoping the Nuggets wouldn't blow it. I was having flashbacks to the Tyler Lydon draft, but I feel pretty good after this one. They got a couple of players that I was both high on. No home runs. Like Nuggets didn't make the headlines. They didn't really make Sports Center. It wasn't one of those nights, but I don't think the Nuggets got worse on draft night. So I'm excited to talk about it.
I actually just saw the Nuggets on one of the top. Um, Actually, no. Let's stick to the draft. I don't want to talk about Kendrick Perkins and what he thinks about the Nuggets. Yes, the draft happened. I will say on my end, I had very low expectations. I think I don't want to say that I'm always right. I'm not always right.
You called this one. You can gas yourself up for this one.
I'm usually right though. I think more often than not, but I don't gamble. So and don't take anything I say to heart. Do not gamble on me because I'm unlucky.
That's right. Put
That
your
is
money where
also
your mouth is,
something.
Ray.
No, that's not how that works. You need to I don't think you understand how unlucky I am. If I bet on something, if I put money on a thing happening, it's definitely not happening. That's how
Hmm.
it works. That's just the gift and the curse that I live with. If you think you can take advantage of what I just said and bet against the thing I put money on, somehow we will both lose. It's not limited to me either.
Impressive.
So don't take anything I say too deeply. But I think yeah, no, I'd be right sometimes. And I definitely was. They traded out of the so I was hoping they would get a future first round pick. I thought that would be the ideal scenario, but I also think that this draft wasn't as deep as people were saying it was. I think
Interesting.
initially, just based on how it panned out, and when I was looking around at who was available, I saw a lot of like oh look this guy he's I'd have a hard time trusting the kind of guy who's maybe like a less than stellar athlete or maybe a little undersized, but oh, he was a
Hmm.
bucket in college. Not that he's not a bucket. I'm sure he would give me buckets, right? But uh, stuff like that translating to the NBA, I think there were a lot of guys with blemishes. Maybe they're a little small. Maybe they can't shoot. Maybe they can't do this, can't do that. Maybe they don't have the physical tools. And there's a handful of guys I think people really loved, whether it was Koa Pete or Dalen Swain or a few others that I think got so much attention that it was hard for me to be like, they're going to be available at 26 though, still.
Right.
And another thing in a general sense, we've been following the NBA for a while. First round picks, they matter.
Yeah.
At the same time, a first round pick in the top 10 and a first round pick in the bottom 10, two very different things.
Yeah.
And I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody that I'm a Ravens fan, to talk a little bit about the NFL. And I was kind of ingratiated into that kind of calculus from guys like Kazi Newsom and how he kind of perceived draft value. Where if you're a team that's at the end of a round, maybe the marginal benefit of pick 26 in our case versus pick 35. I mean, how much better are the guys at the end of the first round versus the early second round? I don't think they're that much different. Peyton Watson is a guy we both, everybody loves, but he could have been 35. He could have been 25. I think there's a range there where it's marginal. If you can get something out of that, I think that's generally going to be worth it. Now, picks at the end of the second round, worthless.
Usually,
If I want to
yeah.
keep it a buck. Yeah.
Yeah, because those guys are usually like a bunch of those guys are telling the agents like, "Don't draft me. I just want to sign with this team because this is like better for me." But
Mhm.
that's an interesting point you make about the depth of the draft, because I actually have a theory on this. So I think we would both agree that the NBA has more talent now than it's ever had, but there's also been a conscious decision by Silver and the owners to like make it a more parity league. And that's worked largely. I mean, the last 8 years we've had 8 different champions, which I think is cool. Some people don't like it. I hate when media get on there and like say, "Oh, bring back the dynasties." I'm like, well, you got to let the little guy have a chance. But I also understand like the Nuggets fan that's like, "Oh, why did we have to go into the apron era and when we finally get Jokic? Like this is like probably the best guy we're ever gonna have in our lifetimes."
Mhm.
But I guess the point I was getting to is there's more talent than there's ever been, but it's not always distributed evenly per se, because I think there's quite a few teams in the NBA who are like really smart, and so they're really good at developing and they have a lot of good players. And a couple of the smaller deals we've seen already is OKC just had to trade a couple of their role players away for second round picks because their tax bill is so high. And so what I think that means, Ray, is I'm going to make a comparison now to the way things have changed in college athletics with NIL and the transfer portal. High school recruiting has kind of taken a back seat because a lot of coaches that are trying to be good next year will just go for the guy who's got 3 to 4 years of experience and get him in as a transfer. So if you're the Hawks and you can get Aaron Wiggins from the Thunder for $7 million a year, like you've seen him play in plenty of NBA games before. Like he's had a game he dropped 40. So he may not have crazy good upside, but you also know he can play. And I think, like you mentioned, the difference between the first 10 picks and the last 10 of the first round is like those guys at the last 10, they might be able to play, but there's also like, if you look at the 20 to 30 picks every year, there's always a good amount of busts in there, like guys that never did anything. So I think it's harder to break in now if you're like a sub top 20 pick because there's just so much talent and like teams that are hoarding all the talent, they can't do it forever, right? At some point these guys that are deep on the bench but are good players want to play, and those other teams would rather acquire those players than like give minutes to an unproven late pick.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. You can definitely, and we've had the experience as Nuggets fans of guys who have come into Denver and not really worked out in our development pipeline in the way we would like them to, where we like keep them long term.
Right.
But they showed enough in these various instances where another team is like, okay, we'll kick the tires on an Isaiah Hartenstein or Colin Gillespie, and lo and behold, they are actually functional
Right.
NBA players. Uh, Talking about, I don't want to say the draft is dead
No.
because because I think free agency is really dead.
Oh yeah.
I think there's always been a degree to which that free agency was the least efficient form of team building. But I
For most
think
teams, yeah.
for most teams, unless you're the Lakers or one of those marquee Miami, right, and you can spend however much you want. Uh, Free agency has never, but especially that is true now, where it seems like nobody good goes to free agency.
Right.
There's a lot to
A lot of risk
me
in that.
with the CBA and how it just I don't know. There's, for one, I think restricted free agency is the biggest part of this.
I was about to say what's really dead is restricted free agency because I think I saw a stat earlier today that there's been one RFA signing in the last 4 years, and it was Matthias Thybulle.
You mean like to another team?
Right.
Yeah. Because other teams rarely have the money, especially in this context of the second apron. And oftentimes teams are just willing to, and maybe this will change over time, but teams are willing to overpay. They would rather just bite the bullet and say, okay, Christian will give you $125 million instead of letting you walk for nothing. So one of the things I'm curious about going forward is like, at what point could teams be willing to say no? Because I keep thinking they will, and then you
Yeah.
see a Trey Young get all the money, and I'm like, oh, I did not expect that.
Well, it's going to be interesting, right? Because we got our own restricted free agent, Peyton Watson, but we can talk about that when it's all over. We want to talk about our draft picks. So the Nuggets trade back. They trade out of pick 26 with the Spurs, and they acquire pick 35, and they
Mhm.
take Trevon Brazile, who's a 6'10 forward out of Arkansas. He played 5 years in college, first year at Missouri, then transferred to Arkansas, played Arkansas for 4 years, and he did tear his ACL early in his career in his first year at Arkansas. But in his last season, he played 31 and a half minutes a game, shot 52% from the field, 34 from three, 65 from two, 71 on free throws, had 7.3 rebounds a game, 13 points a game. And if you watch Arkansas all this year, they were a really good team. They were led by Darius Acuff. He was the number 7 pick by the Kings. They also had Malik Thomas, who's a really good dynamic wing, who also got drafted. I forget by who. I think Cleveland. Um, and he was mostly a play finisher. He's like a super long, bouncy athlete that you can play at the four. Probably not big enough to play at the five. Um, he's got some concerns with his motor. But I like the pick just because I think the team needs athleticism. They need youth. And I always like a guy, and this is true of both of our draft picks, and I'll say this about the other one later too, but I like guys that have faced some adversity in college, right? And if you tear your ACL, oftentimes that's like a big red flag. It's like, oh, I don't want a guy that's injured. Like, I get that, but it's still going to be on a rookie deal. So it's not like you're paying a guy who just got hurt like millions and millions of dollars. But he's going to come in with something to prove, and he's also, I think every senior that gets drafted understands like, hey, if I was better, I would have left earlier. So if I'm going to make it in the NBA, it's going to be as a role player, and I'm excited to have him because I don't know how much he's going to play this first year. Some people think he may not play at all, but I do think he's going to be good enough to be signed. I think he'll either be on a rookie deal or on a two way. I'd be surprised if they two way him. I think he'll get a real contract. Um, I like that he's in our system and that he can learn, you know, how to play next to Jokic and learn from guys like Aaron Gordon and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love the physical, the physical tools that he has are obviously pretty elite. I do think it's where the variance is going to be is in Denver's ability to, between the coaches and leaders on the team like Aaron Gordon, like Jokic, can they maybe even like Peyton Watson as a guy who maybe kind of relates to him a little bit better? Maybe they can be friends on the team. I don't know why. I think they have like a similar energy to them.
I could see that. I just think it's important to get guys who are really talented and can do stuff, and it's
Hmm.
like if they're raw, you can still mold them. And I know he's been in college for 5 years, but it's like he's good at playing without the ball because he's not a guard. He's forward. He's there to finish. He's pretty good on the break. So I think a lot of the times the issues with the Nuggets of the last, few seasons has been when Jokic goes to the bench, they really struggle. And I'm not here to tell you that he's going to fix that, But to have energy guys on the bench, somebody who can come in and block a shot or make a big dunk, that can really like get the team going and help the momentum of the game. Because as much as we all like a guy like Spencer Jones, he's more of a hustle guy, right? He's not going to make like the big athletic play. Because we've seen him be put in the dunker spot when Gordon was out, and he wasn't terrible, but I don't think we would say it was a good fit, right?
It's fine. I probably prefer him in the corner than the dunker
Yeah,
spot because he's not that elite vertical athlete.
right.
And so I think for Brazil, you've got this very clear pathway for him in a role that is relatively simple, playing the dunker spot. I mean, it's really just about reading the timing of that situation. He has the physical tools to execute it at a high level, at an elite level. Like, I'm not saying he'll play a ton of time in the playoffs, but if you needed somebody to for 5 minutes, hey dog, you're gonna bounce between the dunker and the deep corner. And if I hit you with the ball in the deep corner, you shoot the three. And if I hit you with the ball in the dunker, you dunk the ball. And it's not like you have this complicated. I think if you drafted a guard, it's this whole process. For example, a guy like Dalen Swain, not that he's a well, I take about him is he's kind of a combo guard. That he's kind of a guy that like he needs the ball in his hands, and as an off-ball player, he kind of needs to refine his shot. And so there's a whole process there that I think is a lot more complicated than what Brazil will have to do just to see minutes on the floor. And once you see minutes on the floor, you can kind of expand out to other things if it really comes. If you can coach in a great defensive mindset, if you can coach in, if he can improve his shot, those would be great things. But I think at the very least, you're going to get a baseline of this guy can do something for you.
Absolutely. And I think like we all know that Adelman is a guy who hasn't really loved rookies, so it's probably going to be hard to crack the rotation. But I totally agree with what you just said because it's like when you're a big, I do think that the learning curve is a little easier in the NBA because he's already been playing without the ball in college. And it's not like they're going to run plays for him on the Nuggets. He's going to be asked to be a play finisher, catch lobs, and play defense. And I think that's all very doable. Whereas, a guy that we've debated for a couple of years now, like, even though I'm not a Pickett guy, like, even I can concede that I think Jalen Pickett was put in a really difficult position because when you're a guard and you go in the game, you're going to get the ball and now you're expected to make plays, right? So it's kind of like, I understand they're not going to build the team around Jalen Pickett, but you notice him when he's there, right? Because he has the ball. Brazil is much more just like, I'm going to run up and down the court, be on the block, and I'm going to guard my guy, and then I'll play help defense, and then I'll clean stuff up around the rim. I think he kind of reminds me a little bit of like, older Nuggets fans will remember Chris Birdman Anderson. Very similar build, kind of a skinny, tall, big guy, but pretty athletic and can create exciting plays. Birdman was never really talented enough to be like a starter, but he brought energy and he brought you know big blocks and big finishes, and I think that's a useful player.
Yeah, and like an intensity to it. It's nice that he can shoot a little bit. Hopefully, my initial comp was like Kenneth Reed, but maybe he can shoot.
Hmm.
And maybe he can defend. Where and you don't have to your point, put in a lot of effort to make everything work for him in a way that I think we'll probably talk about this further in the offseason. But I think for Pickett, for Julian Strother, for Peyton, those guys had to be put in a position that kind of made sense for them. I mean, obviously, and you can do the wrong thing with Brazil too. I don't think he's a five. Like, I think if you try to be like, yeah, just post him up,
No.
you're probably you can still make the wrong calls there. I think we did a lot of the same things with Zeke, where we're like, he doesn't have great ball skills, but we were like, hey, can you play the five? Can you get in the post? Can you do these other things? And it's like, no. But you don't have to coach a whole new scheme or set up an idealized lineup to get him to see the floor. And that'll be, I think, something that translates relatively quickly. I think he can also fit next to other guys. Like if you told me Brazil was at the five, I'd be like, yeah, that's bad. But if you told me Brazil was playing next to like Aaron Gordon and Deron Holmes in like a bench unit, maybe you can kind of piece together
Yeah.
the skill sets where maybe you don't have a traditional five, but you've got guys who can do the little things you need to do, even if it's only collectively.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting you mentioned Fareed because I talked about him when we drafted him a little bit because I do think Brazil is probably the best non-AG player in terms of like pure athleticism that Jokic has had at the four spot since Fareed. Fareed had an incredible motor though, but he was only about like 6'8". He wasn't like a really tall guy. Um,
Hmm.
a couple guys that I heard Swipe on Locked the Nuggets compare him to was Jackson Hayes and Willie Cauley Stein. I don't think he's quite as big as those guys. Those guys are more like you're okay with them playing at the five. I think Brazil would need to fill out a little more to do that. But one thing that he does better than those two guys is he actually can put the ball on the floor a little bit. Like you're not gonna, give it to him on the wing and go create. But if there's a break, you can throw it to him at the 3 point line, and he can take a couple of dribbles and dunk it. Like you'll see that on his highlight tape. So if he's got a slow guy or a mismatch or a step and somebody closes out, like he definitely can can get to the hoop. Um, and I'm excited. I'm sure he'll be on the summer league team, and we'll get to see him against other guys that are drafted high and guys that have been in the league and been in the G League. This is we always like to make fun of summer league, but it really is still a step up from the college game. So it'll be good to see him in that environment and to see him with NBA spacing because as we know, like even though the level of basketball is higher, that's one thing that I always think some guys it actually helps is like having more space means there's less hands in there to like swipe the ball, right? There's no clogged up zone defenses for you.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get a lot of no one's going to be putting him high on the scouting report in such a way that he's going to get smothered out of things. You're really looking for him to play off of Jokic and Murray. And I think to that point, if we're trying to run it back and keep Jokic and Murray together, I think he's a piece that fits that puzzle, fits that archetype. Obviously, he's not as polished as Aaron Gordon is, but if you're looking for players to kind of match the skill sets, I think he's a good second round pick to that
Yeah.
point.